It was near the end of my junior year when I moved into a small townhouse with my roommate of 2 years, and a landlady who was, to put it nicely, unhinged. That's a story for another day, though. The washer and dryer in the new place didn't work, and after procrastinating for a week, I decided to head to a local laundromat one night after class to wash some clothes. It was late, probably around 9 at night, and since I didn't have a car, I had to take the bus there. The laundromat wasn't in a bad area, but it wasn't exactly busy either, especially that late. I loaded up my clothes, threw in some detergent, and took a seat on one of those stiff plastic benches to scroll through my phone while I waited. That's when a tall man, mid-30s, maybe early 40s, walked in and sat down beside me. He had an average look about him, nothing particularly remarkable, and his tone was calm, almost friendly. But from the moment he opened his mouth, something about him made my skin crawl. I had my headphones in, but that didn't stop him from talking. He started asking me questions right away. If I lived nearby, if I was new to the area, if I had family around. None of it made much sense. This was a massive suburb outside DC, not a small town where everyone knew each other. I gave short, vague answers and kept looking at my phone, hoping he'd get the hint. But he kept going, throwing in compliments that made my stomach twist. He told me I was cute, adorable, and asked how old I was, guessing I was 18 or 19. I was 21, but I've always looked younger, which only made the whole thing feel worse. I decided to lie. I told him I had a boyfriend, that I was just washing some of his clothes and he'd be expecting me home soon. That should have been enough to make most people back off. But instead, he smiled and said, "Well, we can still be friends, right? Maybe I could take you out sometime, or have you over for dinner." The way he said it made my stomach drop. I gave him a quick, "No thank you," put my headphones back in, and turned away. He lingered for a few seconds before walking off. I tried to shake it off and told myself he was just being weird. But a few minutes later, when I started transferring my clothes to the dryer, I saw him again. He'd come back. He was pacing around the laundromat now, slowly, deliberately, walking close behind me every time he passed. I felt trapped. The dryers were lined up against the back wall, and the only exit was across the room. He was tall, easily 6'3", and solidly built, while I'm barely 5'4". Every time I moved, I could feel his presence at my back. I didn't dare turn around. I just kept my eyes on his reflection in the glass of the dryer door, my heart racing as I tried to remember every self-defense move I'd learned in a workshop months earlier. After what felt like forever, he left again. The dryers finished a few minutes later, but something in my gut screamed at me not to go out the front. I gathered my clothes, took a deep breath, and slipped out the side door instead. When I stepped outside, I froze. His car was parked right by the main exit, driver's side door open, phone in hand. He wasn't scrolling or texting. He was waiting. I immediately called a friend and told her to stay on the phone with me. Then I bolted down the street to a small restaurant that was still open. I ducked inside, ordered something just to have an excuse to stay, and found a seat by the window. From there, I could see the laundromat parking lot. He stayed parked there for another 30 minutes. No one joined him. No one got in or out. He was just waiting. Eventually, he drove off. I waited another half hour before calling an Uber and heading home, clutching my bag of clothes like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. When I got back, I just sat on the floor and cried. I never told my boyfriend or my girlfriend about what happened. I didn't even tell my roommate for months. It felt embarrassing, like I'd done something wrong by being out that late or not leaving sooner. But a few months later, I came across a Twitter thread from a girl who'd nearly been trafficked at a subway station by a man who acted exactly the same way, asking personal questions, offering a ride, then waiting outside after she tried to get away. That's when it really hit me how close I might have come to something terrible that night. I've read that my area, this polished, wealthy DC suburb, is actually one of the top regions in the country for sex trafficking. And when I think back to the way he watched me, the way he positioned himself between me and the door, I realize I might have walked straight into a trap if I hadn't trusted that gut feeling and taken the side exit instead. A few nights ago, one of my friends called and asked if I could give him a ride to an event and then pick him up an hour or so later. I didn't really have any plans that night, and he offered me $40, so I figured sure, why not? Around 8 o'clock we were on the road, heading toward the place. It was absolutely pouring, one of those nights where the rain looks like a sheet coming down, and you can barely see the car in front of you. Between the weather and the event traffic, I had to stay completely focused on driving. We got there around 8:30, and my buddy hopped out. Since the place was about 30 minutes from my house, it didn't make much sense to drive all the way home just to turn around and come back. I decided I'd just kill time somewhere nearby. I had my new luxury car with me. It had a great sound system, and I figured I'd take advantage of it while I waited. I just needed to park somewhere quiet so I could hook up my phone to the Bluetooth. I ended up pulling into this vacant gas station. It was dark, empty, and quiet, and it didn't cross my mind how sketchy it might look to be sitting there alone at night in an expensive car. I just wanted to get my music going and relax. I was scrolling through my phone, trying to connect to Bluetooth, when I happened to glance up. That's when I saw headlights sweep into the lot. An old white BMW pulled in fast and stopped in the middle of the parking lot, facing directly toward me. There were two guys in the front and a woman in the back. My guard immediately went up. I didn't know what they were doing there, but I had a bad feeling right away. I waited, hoping they'd just turn around and leave. But instead, the passenger door flung open and one of the guys jumped out. He started running straight toward my car. I froze for a second, my brain struggling to catch up with what I was seeing. Then I saw his face. He wasn't confused or asking for help. He looked furious, his expression completely locked on me, like he had one purpose, and that was to get to me. The look in his eyes was pure intent. I didn't think. I just slammed my foot on the gas. The tires squealed as I shot out of the parking lot, rain splashing across the windshield. I checked the mirrors and saw him still running toward me, yelling something I couldn't hear through the storm. The woman had gotten out now too, moving in my direction, and for a terrifying second, I thought they might actually try to block me in. I turned hard onto the street, ignoring the red light ahead, and just kept going. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking as I sped through the rain-soaked streets. I didn't slow down until I hit the highway. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see their headlights appear behind me, but they never did. Once I realized I wasn't being followed, the adrenaline started wearing off, and that's when the fear really hit. I pulled into a well-lit rest stop and just sat there for a few minutes, trying to process what had happened. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. 3 people in a beat-up car, watching a lone guy sitting in a new, expensive one. They must have seen me as an easy target for a carjacking. When I finally calmed down a bit, I called my dad and told him what happened. He was relieved I'd trusted my instincts and gotten out of there fast. I told him I wanted to look into getting a handgun for protection, something I'd never even thought about before that night. Looking back now, it's clear how easily that situation could have gone bad. If I hadn't looked up when I did, that guy could have been at my door in seconds. Every time I drive at night now, I make sure to stay in well-lit areas and never stop anywhere empty. That night was a hard reminder that danger doesn't always give you a warning. It just shows up out of nowhere. I've always had this habit of walking alone at night. It's something I've done for years, and even though I know it's not the safest thing for a woman my size, it's one of the few things that genuinely makes me feel at peace. There's something about the quiet and the stillness that just calms my mind. I always take precautions, pepper spray in one hand, phone in the other, but I refuse to let fear take away something that brings me joy. Summer nights are my favorite, especially in the Pacific Northwest. The days stretch forever, and the twilight feels endless. That soft blue light fading over the trees, the air cooling down just enough to brush your skin. There's this crisp, almost silky feeling to the night air here that I've loved since I moved from the desert years ago. It's different, alive somehow. Sometimes I just walk for miles, letting it soak in. My town is small, barely a blip on a map, and at the edge of it is this long, winding trail that cuts through miles of marshland, forest, and open fields. It's the kind of place that feels cut off from the world, especially after dark. Most nights, it's just me, the bats, and maybe a single cyclist passing through. Once you get past the last streetlight, you're surrounded by darkness, no houses close by, and no easy exit except to keep walking forward. That night, I'd been walking for a couple of hours already. I kept one headphone in and the other out, an old habit, just to make sure I could hear anyone or anything nearby. My crossbody bag held my usual stuff: water, Idaho, a little cash. I didn't use my phone light unless I absolutely needed to, but by the time I started heading back, it was pitch black. The only light came from my phone screen and the faint shimmer of the night sky through the trees. I remember how peaceful it felt right before things got weird. Just me, the crunch of gravel under my shoes, the smell of cedar in the air. Then, out of nowhere, I noticed something darker than the darkness ahead of me, like this thick black shape stretched across the trail. At first I thought it was just a trick of the shadows, maybe a fallen branch or a big puddle reflecting nothing. But as I walked closer, it didn't move or change with the light. It was solid. I slowed down, my stomach twisting. My phone was already in my hand, and I had 911 ready to dial just in case. When I got close enough, I realized what it was: a man lying across the trail, face down. A big black coat spread around him like wings. My light caught streaks of something on the pavement nearby, smears of blood. Not a lot, but enough to make my pulse jump. I took a cautious step closer. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out, my voice sounding smaller than I meant it to. And then he moved. He sat up fast, startling me so bad I nearly dropped my phone. His face was rough, sunburnt, and dirty, but his eyes were clear. "Oh, I'm fine," he said with this weird, almost cheerful tone. "Just resting. You got any water?" I hesitated for a second, then handed over my water bottle, telling him to keep it. He drank, thanked me, and started rambling about how he'd scraped his bare foot wandering around and decided to take a break there on the trail. That's when I recognized him, a local drunk, sometimes on meth, who wandered town causing trouble. I'd seen him before. He'd puked on my porch once and called me some choice names another time. He didn't seem violent right then, just worn out, so I asked if he needed me to call anyone. A friend, an ambulance, anything. He shook his head and told me he was fine, just resting his feet. I decided to take his word for it and carefully stepped around him, keeping my distance the whole time. I could feel his eyes on me as I passed, and every instinct told me not to linger. I walked home faster than usual that night, trying not to let the encounter sink in until I was safely behind my locked door. I didn't think much more of it, just figured it was one of those weird run-ins that come with walking at odd hours. A few months later, I saw his name in the local paper. He'd attacked a random tourist downtown with a machete in broad daylight, cutting the guy's leg open. They arrested him on the spot, and he's been in prison ever since. When I was about 16, I had just gotten my driver's license and felt pretty proud of myself. One night, I went over to my mom's house to work on a school paper because her computer was faster than my dad's old one. It was late but calm, one of those quiet suburban evenings where nothing feels off. I'd been typing for a while when I decided to take a quick break and head to the bathroom, which sat at the very back of the house, facing the backyard through a small window. Right as I was about to flick on the light, I heard something outside. It wasn't close, more like somewhere toward the end of the yard, but it was enough to make me stop. I moved closer to the window, peering out into the dark. At first, there was nothing, just stillness and the faint glow from a distant streetlight. Then something darted across the yard. It was quick, just a blur of motion. I told myself it was probably a kid cutting through. People often used our yard as a shortcut between the two streets that bordered our property. Still, even with that explanation, I felt uneasy. I was completely alone. My mom and dad both worked second shift at aerospace plants, and no one would be home for hours. I shook it off and went back to the living room, which had a massive front window and a sliding glass door that led to the backyard. I sat back down, trying to focus on my paper. A few quiet minutes passed, and I started to calm down, until I heard it again. This time, it wasn't distant. It was soft, deliberate movement coming from just outside the back door. Someone was out there, trying to move quietly. I picked up my phone and called my dad, whispering what was happening. He told me to stay calm and get somewhere safe. While he had someone at work call the police, he stayed on the line with me. The plan was for me to grab my keys and head to my car, which was parked on the opposite side of the house by the driveway. He wanted me to stay put, but there was no way in hell I was sitting there waiting for whoever was creeping around to come inside. The moment I stepped out the front door, I felt completely exposed. The air was cold, and the silence was suffocating. Every sound, my shoes on the driveway, my keys jingling, felt impossibly loud. I forced the key into the lock, started the car, and sped out of the driveway, heart pounding like it was trying to escape my chest. My dad's workplace was only about 10 minutes away, and when I pulled up, he was already waiting outside. We drove back to the house together, meeting the police there. What they found still chills me to this day. Every light in the house was on. Every door, bedroom doors, closet doors, even the ones to the attic and basement, was open. Nothing was missing. Not a single thing out of place except for that. Whoever had been there hadn't come to rob us. They just wanted to scare the hell out of me. After that night, I never felt comfortable in my mom's house again. Even after she moved, I still catch myself locking doors twice and checking windows before bed. It's one thing to think someone might break in for your stuff. It's another to realize someone just wanted to mess with your mind. For context, I'm a woman, 5'2", barely 100 pounds. This happened about 3 years ago, just after I turned 18. At the time, I was working at a small restaurant along a busy main road just outside Halifax, Nova Scotia. It wasn't the kind of place where bad things happened. Quiet, familiar, and usually safe. Especially at night, when the streets emptied and the town seemed to hum softly with the sound of passing cars and distant streetlights. It was a warm summer night, around 10 o'clock, when my shift ended. I clocked out, said goodnight to the rest of the crew, and stepped outside. The restaurant lights glowed behind me, and I walked across the mostly empty parking lot to the bus stop just a few feet away. The stop was right at the edge of the lot, under a streetlight that flickered occasionally, but gave off enough light to see clearly. I was only going 10 minutes up the road to my boyfriend's house, so I didn't think twice about waiting there alone. I'd only been sitting for a couple of minutes when a red two-door car pulled into the lot. That in itself wasn't unusual. People often pulled in after hours, saw we were closed, and drove off. But this guy didn't park in front of the restaurant or even head for the door. Instead, he stopped right in the middle of the lot, maybe 10 feet from where I sat, his car perfectly angled so I couldn't easily get back inside without walking right past him. "Hey," he called out through the open window, his voice casual but loud enough to echo a little in the quiet lot. I gave him a quick polite, "Hi," trying not to sound rude, and turned my attention back toward the road, pretending to check for the bus. "Where you going, beautiful?" he asked next. That made me glance back. He looked maybe in his early 20s, baseball cap pulled low, clean-shaven, just a regular-looking guy at first glance. I told him truthfully that I was going to my boyfriend's. He smirked. "You sure you don't want to hang out with me instead?" I shook my head and tried to laugh it off, but then he said, "I bet his dick doesn't look like mine." My stomach turned. My hands started shaking a little, and I instinctively reached into my pocket for my phone. But before I could even pull it out, he said, in this almost sing-song voice, "Get in the car." I froze. For a second, I thought maybe I'd misheard him, but he nodded toward his passenger seat, smiling in this fake, cheerful way that made my skin crawl. I forced out a nervous, "No, thank you," and kept my hand moving toward my phone, trying not to make any sudden movements that might set him off. Then his door opened. The sound of it, the click, the slow creak, sent a jolt through me. He got out, stood up, and his whole demeanor changed. The cheerfulness was gone. He stared straight at me and said again, low and serious this time, "Get in the car." He started walking around the front of his vehicle, and my body went completely rigid. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. There was nowhere for me to run that didn't take me closer to him. Then the restaurant door burst open behind me. Out stepped Jim, one of the kitchen guys. He was big, covered in tattoos, with a beard that made him look twice as intimidating. He stood there for a moment, looking from me to the man, and I swear I've never been so relieved to see anyone in my life. The guy froze mid-step. It couldn't have been more than a second before he turned back to his car, slammed the door shut, and peeled out of the parking lot so fast I couldn't even catch the plate. I just stood there, shaking, as Jim walked over to ask if I was okay. I could barely answer. I think he knew just from looking at me what almost happened. I still think about that night sometimes, how quickly things went from normal to terrifying, and how if Jim hadn't walked out at that exact moment, I might have been gone before anyone realized I was missing. I'm currently on crutches because of a bad ankle injury. I've been stuck indoors for nearly a week now, and the boredom has been unbearable. Earlier tonight, around 3 a.m, I decided I'd go for a short walk, something I used to do often when I couldn't sleep. My mom had bought some cans of Coke for my brother earlier, and since I'd mixed a couple with amaretto out of boredom, I figured I'd go replace them. There's a petrol station about 10 minutes away, so despite my ankle, I grabbed my crutches and hobbled out into the cool night. The streets were mostly quiet, just that eerie stillness you get in the early hours. When I reached a set of traffic lights, I had to wait as a few cars passed. One of them, a small dark car with 3 people inside, stopped longer than it needed to. The driver and his passengers were staring right at me. I stared back for a moment, uncomfortable but trying not to show it. Eventually they drove off, and I crossed the street, telling myself I was just being jumpy. The walk took me longer than usual since I couldn't move fast, but I didn't mind the quiet. It was a nice night. About 5 minutes later, I noticed headlights behind me again, and sure enough, it was the same car. It slowed as it passed me, the passengers looking out the window. My stomach twisted. I kept walking and focused on getting to the petrol station. Once I was inside the brightly lit shop, I felt a lot better. I bought the Cokes, chatted briefly with the cashier, and figured the weird encounter was over. When I left, the streets were empty again. A man walked past me going the opposite direction, and I barely gave him a second thought. It's not unusual to see a few drunk people around that time of night. But only a minute later, the same car came creeping down the road again. It pulled up to the same traffic lights, not far from where I was. A taxi behind it honked when it didn't move after the light turned green, and that sound made me realize how tense I'd gotten. Then I noticed the man from earlier. He'd turned around and was now walking behind me. Not close enough to touch, but close enough to make my skin crawl. I turned down a side street toward my neighborhood, and thankfully, he didn't follow right away. But when I looked back again, the car was rolling slowly down the road toward me. I quickly turned into someone's front garden and crouched behind a hedge until it passed. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my ankle. When I stepped back out, the street was empty again. I tried to move faster, half limping, half running. My house was only a couple of turns away now. I kept glancing over my shoulder, praying I wouldn't see anyone. And that's when I spotted him again. The same man, walking fast this time, closing the distance between us. I turned onto my street and pushed myself as fast as I could, ignoring the pain shooting up my leg. When I reached my house, I checked behind me. Thankfully, he hadn't followed me all the way. I slipped inside, locked the door, and set the burglar alarm. My whole body was shaking. My ankle throbbed from the effort, but I dragged myself upstairs and peeked out the front window. The street looked empty, until I saw a car slowly rolling past the bottom of the road. The same one. It idled for a few seconds before finally driving away. I didn't sleep that night. I don't know if the man and the car were connected. Maybe it was a coincidence, maybe it wasn't. But ever since then, I haven't gone out for a late night walk, and I don't think I ever will again. I live in a small, quiet town, the kind of place where you generally feel safe doing everyday things on your own. As a mom with a house full of kids, I rarely get the chance to shop alone, so when I do, it almost feels like a break. One night, I decided to take advantage of that quiet time and run to the grocery store by myself. It was late, at least for me, and I called my husband on the way to let him know I'd only be a few minutes. The parking lot was mostly empty when I arrived. Inside, there were just a handful of people wandering around for late-night snacks or last-minute groceries. I grabbed a basket and started down the first aisle for the few ingredients I needed for a recipe the next day. That's when I first saw him. A man, maybe in his 50s, shopping alone. He was standing in the middle of the aisle, so I politely stepped aside and gave him a quick smile as I passed. I didn't think twice about it. Small towns make you polite like that. A few aisles later, I spotted him again. He wasn't looking at the shelves or comparing prices. He was looking right at me. His expression was blank, but his eyes didn't move when mine met his. I brushed it off, convincing myself he just happened to be in the same aisle again. Still, something about it made me uneasy. I moved to the other side of the store, all the way to the dairy section, figuring there was no way he'd pop up there too. But when I turned from the cooler with a carton of milk in my hand, there he was again, just standing a few yards away, watching me. He didn't even have anything in his hands this time. My stomach dropped, and my instincts finally kicked in. I decided to head toward the front of the store, pretending I was done shopping. I walked quickly down the main aisle and glanced back halfway to the registers. He was following me, pushing his half-empty cart at a steady pace. I sped up. By the time I reached the front, I thought maybe I'd lost him. To throw him off, I veered into another aisle and grabbed one last random item, thinking that would end it. When I turned around, he was gone, or so I thought. Relieved, I headed to the self-checkout, only to see him standing near the front doors, not shopping, not checking out, just waiting. My pulse picked up again. I started scanning my items, trying not to look in his direction, when he suddenly pushed his cart over to the register directly behind me. Out of every open station in that empty store, he chose the one right there. I had about 10 items. He had maybe 5. He moved painfully slow, pretending to check out while keeping his eyes fixed in my direction. That's when I remembered I only had my checkbook with me, and the self-checkouts didn't take checks. I waved over a manager and explained, forcing a smile even though my hands were shaking. She had to move my whole order to another register and ring me up manually. It took a while, long enough that he could have easily finished and left. But he didn't. He lingered until I was done, finally walking toward the opposite exit, but not before turning his head and staring right at me one last time. I stood there, frozen for a few seconds after he left, then waited for a couple of families to finish checking out before walking outside. I made sure to stick close beside them as we crossed the parking lot. My keys were already in my hand, and I threw all my bags into the passenger seat instead of the trunk. I got in, locked the doors, and started the car immediately. When I looked up, I saw his truck parked in the next aisle over, facing me. He was just sitting there. That was all I needed to see. I pulled out quickly and drove across the lot, putting as much distance between us as I could. I didn't drive straight home. I took a few detours to make sure I wasn't being followed. Eventually, I got home safe, but the fear lingered long after. Now, I don't go shopping alone at night anymore. That man didn't say a word to me the whole time, but the way he moved, following, waiting, watching, said more than enough.